Grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. Solving the world's problems 12 ounces at a time. It's Dudes and Beer. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode 140.5 of the Dudes and Beer podcast.
I like that, 0.5.
Yeah, 0.5. We actually had the official episode 140 this morning with Zach Baumer, who is the manager of the Austin Climate Change Program with the Office of Sustainability for the city of Austin.
Such a good episode.
We got into some great information talking about renewable energies, what we can do as individuals to help out with the cause of renewable energy in our local markets. What we can do as homeowners, even people in apartments.
Yeah, even in apartments.
Like, believe it or not, what it does just to turn off a light as you leave a room, folks. Like, I'm one of those people that always leaves a light on in my house.
Yeah, me too, actually.
I mean, other than, like, even whenever I go to sleep, like that front light that I have in my house, like, you turn it down and it just dims. It doesn't cut off completely. It just dims.
Yeah,
but,
I like that dimmer.
And it's a security thing, I guess. I've got timers and stuff like that for whenever I'm out of town, that kind of stuff. But setting stuff up on timers, even like my chicken house, the electricity out there is on a timer, so it cuts itself on, it cuts itself off, that kind of stuff. It makes a big difference in your overall bill as a consumer. And on top of that, just talking about some of the science, like it's amazing to me how many people still utterly deny climate change. I jokingly said this morning, like I'm a flat earther at heart. I'd love to believe that it's not the case. I'd love to believe that science as we know it just doesn't exist, because good God, we talk about some horrifying science sometimes on this show.
Because it's able to prove sometimes some not so good stuff.
One of the big topics that we talked about was actually the electric grid and the issues with the electric grid, and that's something that not a lot of people realize, and why a lot of cities haven't gone full renewable is because it's fairly useless on an aging electric grid. Like you gotta up the grid first to make sure it's ready for that kind of technology, because the signal flow and things like that is totally different.
Yeah, if everybody went to the LEDs, like what it would do.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before, the study from Pecan Street Energy, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And we talked about that today, actually, the
just
signal to
wouldn't
noise
work
ratios,
on this old grid that we got.
That kind of stuff. And, even, a lot of the stuff that we have now, 90% of what we have now is straight up Tesla technology. And I'm not talking like Tesla motors, folks. I'm talking like Nikola Tesla was the man who made the patents. He came up with the idea of alternating electric current. He came up with the idea of using oscillation to push currents further and further. Of course, it makes it more dangerous, but it allows you to be able to transmit up to miles over wire.
Before that, you would have had a cable running across your
you had to have a repeater station,
and a repeater
every couple miles.
But those cables were huge and thick.
Yeah,
they would block out the sun in some cities.
Yeah, it was wild. It was absolutely insane, the number of wires. Whenever you look at Menlo Park and stuff like that, of course, Thomas Edison was the wizard of Menlo Park. He was the man who, as we know, came up with the light bulb, but really, he had a shop of people.
I was going to say,
he came up with ideas, kind of handed them over, and then other people did the hard work. Other people did the legwork. Even Nikola Tesla.
And only this is coming out, and
Well, and I mean, it's been pretty well known, the rivalry between Nikola Tesla, the war of the currents between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison.
But when people always think of the light bulb and stuff, they think of Edison.
That's all they think about.
Yeah.
That's all they think about is the branding. That's it.
The branding, that's it.
And the whole reason that Westinghouse Power ended up existing was because Westinghouse ended up financially backing Nikola Tesla, and they were the ones that tapped Niagara Falls and all that kind of stuff and started power down the East Coast.
Never did it before.
Yeah, something like that had never really been done before. So, and of course, like I said, AC is a lot more dangerous, and you
were talking about that.
It was a really, really informative episode to sit back and talk with Zach. So for our audience out there who was not able to tune in at 8 a.m. this morning, we actually have a full replay of the episode tonight. We loved it so much that we were like, we've got to get this information out to as many people as possible as the new year comes around, as tax season comes around, and people are looking for last-minute rebates on taxes, that kind of stuff.
Right.
There are many city programs, like he said, that offer rebates to people for using alternative energy, buying alternative energy credits, things like that. So let's go ahead and tune into that, Steve-O.
Let's do it.
All right.
Attention. The live broadcast you have tuned into is a pre-recorded episode of the Dudes and Beer podcast. Dudes and Beer is presently traveling the vast void of time and space in an effort to find you more of the best content in the known universe. Enjoy the following transmission, and remember, if you can't be good at it.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this morning edition, first morning edition, this drive time edition of the Dudes and Beer podcast, episode 140. Actually, what a nice round number. It is wild to think that we've had 140 episodes. That's got to ring into the thousands of hours now.
Yeah, for sure.
Stuff, because I know we have some episodes that, went on for 3 hours. Some stuff like Meekum where it's like 5 hours long.
All weekend.
Just like marathon shows.
The auto auction.
Yeah, the Meekum auto auction. We go out and do that live. But in this drive time episode, I'm so happy to talk about this today. Oh, wow, we already have chats going on. We got Stephen Bishop with us on the chat this morning. We have Julie in the studio, as well as our special guest from the City of Austin Sustainability Department, Office of Sustainability, Mr. Zach Baumer. How are you today?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
He's the program manager for sustainability in Austin and for climate. And we're going to be talking about science. We're going to be talking about what we can do in the new year, not only as individuals, but in a larger scale concept as a city, as people in general, to help the environment around us, to help us get closer to zero emissions, help us get closer to zero output in our kitchens, all that kind of fun stuff. Yeah. So let's start off with, like we were saying before the show started, Zach, with science. Let's start off with that concept, because I'm a flat earther at heart. Like, I root for the underdog, and it's like...
like, wouldn't that be something if they were right all along?
You didn't tell me that before we started.
I thought I'd throw that at you.
He's not.
No, I'm not a flat earther whatsoever. Even Steve's like, what? Yeah, I root for the underdog, but it's one of those like, man, there's so much going on out there amongst the internet, everything else. What is climate science to begin with? Like, let's start there so that we can get into what it is that you do. How did you get into climate science to begin with? Let's start there. Yeah,
okay.
Let's start a little bit with you first and what brought you into this field.
Yeah, so I grew up in Indiana, in Indianapolis, Indiana, and just was generally interested in science and math and all those things growing up as a kid. I went to Purdue University, and I actually studied chemical engineering at Purdue.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and when you go to engineering school, they don't do a good job of describing like what the actual jobs are going to be. Mm-hmm. So about 3 years into chemical engineering, I understand that my job is going to be at a chemical plant or at an oil refinery.
Yeah.
And I see these places and I'm like, wait.
Polymers.
I don't want
to contribute to that.
Polymers are interesting to me, but I don't want to work at a chemical plant.
Yeah.
And growing up as a kid, I mean, I was just, my parents always took us camping. Like, I was kind of environmentally minded as a kid. And just my parents sort of supported that sort of thing. So I kind of switched my career path and sort of moved to focus on environmental issues. So my first job out of school, I focused on environmental contamination, so soil contamination, water pollution, like things like that. I worked for a consulting company for a bunch of years. Then I went to a graduate school in San Francisco called Presidio Graduate School.
Okay.
That is focused on sustainability, and it was focused on this concept that sustainability and moving sort of society sustainability is so big and so complicated that you can't do that without business. So having, business is the most sort of powerful thing that's out there. A powerful mechanism to like meet people's needs and make money and like make change.
Businesses are community changers to begin with. They create jobs. They put people
products,
to work.
Like services.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So the whole sort of concept of Presidio Graduate School was that you had to have people with MBAs who cared about the environment to be able to like make change, like big change in the world.
Okay.
So when I was out there, that's kind of where I started to learn about climate change. This was in 2006, 7, 8. Sort of got on this path, learning about climate change, learning about the sources of the emissions that create climate change, and that sort of led me down this road of understanding climate science, but more specifically understanding energy and understanding energy flows in the community, because climate change is caused by the use of fossil fuels, and so it's really understanding how we use energy. And fossil fuels, even to this day, powers most of the economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's understanding how fossil fuels are extracted, how they're used, and then how we use energy and how we can change those forms of using energy in the future.
Yeah, yeah. And, it like I said, most people don't really realize the impact of a lot of technology to begin with. Even whenever you're talking solar technology, that kind of stuff, like you're talking about some pretty corrosive chemicals to, extract lithium to make batteries to be able to charge.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And
I mean, the level of science and technology in our daily lives, I think, is so far beyond the comprehensive.
Oh, God,
list.
yeah.
I mean, just to understand that you get in this thing made of plastic and steel, and like you turn a switch and like fossil fuels that were extracted from thousands of feet below the ground
from like millions of years ago.
Yeah.
Or millions of years ago.
Are
going through a tube.
And your bumper's made out of the same thing that's fueling your vehicle.
It is.
That's lubricating your vehicle, that the hoses are made out of.
And that every single time you press on the gas and every single time like you're moving around, there is an explosion that's happening in your energy that is, and so when it comes down to climate change, like all of this stuff comes down to chemistry and physics.
Sure does.
So the chemistry.
Science, kids.
So, the very simple thing of like burning a hydrocarbon and it creating energy.
Yep.
And then the emissions are CO2 and water. And so that's what comes out of the tailpipe.
A prime example, even we do the same thing as people.
We do.
Animals do the same thing, yes, Stephen, absolutely. Dinosaur blood. That is what we're using to fuel our vehicles, is dinosaur blood. Stephen's the other side of Dudes and Beer.
This is only, the second episode that he's ever missed?
Yes. As a matter of fact, Steve's only missed three, because he was not in the first episode. So, yeah. Three episodes that Steve has not been in.
Aww.
But it's funny. So the dino thing, it always strikes me as like, we talk about dinosaur bones, and I think people actually imagine that like it's just the dinosaurs that are actually
totally. That's all.
But it's really much more algae and stuff like that.
I mean, it was millions of years of all the plants and all.
Can you imagine if it was only dinosaurs?
All the deadfall and everything else.
There must have been a lot of dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Like 4 miles deep of dinosaurs.
Just
like cardwood. It's a lot of people, I think, misconstrue the concept of climate science to begin with, and really don't take the time to understand it. Like, yes, there is, and I'm not going to lie, people, there are studies from NASA talking about solar cycles. I mean, good God, solar flares are reclassified almost every year now. Yep. Like the solar cycle has gotten so crazy. Yep. And that absolutely changes our atmosphere. You know, like I was telling Julie earlier, geez, the polarized caps on Mars are melting too. That must be our solar powered robots that are doing it. No, there is a solar cycle. There are Earth. I mean, even the Milankovitch cycles. Yeah. You know, every 10,000 years where the poles start to flip and that kind of stuff. All of that plays a part, absolutely, but we have a huge impact on the earth and the world around us. Yeah. And that's been seen throughout mankind. You know, they used to use mercury, all kinds of things to mine gold, all that kind of stuff, and extract. And that's the thing, is that to extract some things from the earth, we have to use some pretty volatile chemicals. We have to use some harsh stuff. You know, like I said, back in Roman times, that kind of stuff, they used mercury as a fixative for gold to remove it. And,
I think a lot of this is that chemistry and physics aren't always immediately apparent, right? Like we don't see gravity, we don't see the CO2 or the oxygen that's going in our mouth. None of us have ever seen it before. We're not ever going to see it. Yeah. But it is going on around us and makes the world work every day. So with climate change, I mean, you know, of course the Earth goes through cycles. You know, we have been, you know, Texas has been under ocean before. Yeah. There have been glaciers that have covered the Earth. I mean, you know, we have gone from super hot to super cold. And through science, they have measured, you know, changes in those cycles over, you know, millions and millions of years. Sure. And measured changes in atmospheric concentrations of different gases. And
ice core samples, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Ice core samples, caves, trees, all sorts of different things. And, you know, but scientists discovered many, many years ago that I think the original place that they discovered the greenhouse effect was when they were studying Venus and trying to understand why Venus was so hot. Because I think they took measurements and tried to understand what was going on with that planet and found that it was shrouded in all these clouds, and they were like, wow, it's super hot. Why is that happening? And it was because of the gases that were in the atmosphere. And this is physics, so it's when light comes off the sun, it comes in all these different wavelengths. And when it bounces off the Earth, certain chemicals vibrate at the same frequency as certain wavelengths of light, and they trap the heat. Yep. I know it's crazy. But
No, I mean, ozone is the reason our sky is blue. Because of how it refracts light, everything else. And, you know, unfortunately, there are spots now in the atmosphere where the ozone is thinner than it used to be. Yeah. And that was, good God, I remember hearing about that when I was like 5 years old.
Yeah.
In like elementary school in like 1980. The world is for sure
going to end right now because of the ozone layer.
Yeah. Like I remember the big push
like,
to
sunscreen.
Yeah. Yeah. So so through ice cores, I mean, they've been able to measure the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere going up and going down, going up and going down over really long periods of time. But the thing that humans have done is, because we are extracting fossil fuels from underneath the ground that wouldn't typically be part of like natural on the surface cycles. Yeah. That those things are extracted from underground, oil, gas, coal. And we then take what was underground and then put it into the air. And, you know, we've been doing this for 150 years. We are really good at it. Yeah. You know, it's all of the stuff in this room, all of human society as we know it is based on that. And it's interesting. The other thing I thought of right then was, you know, it's not so much the dinos. It's more, I like to think of fossil fuels as trapped sunlight. So it's like ancient sunlight that has been, that the Earth collected, because the only place we get energy from
is the sun.
Mm-hmm. And so the sun creates the plants that create everything else. So anyway, so when we take that carbon that was trapped underground and then put it into the atmosphere, it's like, you know, it's like taking coffee from this cup and pouring it in the other cup. Like, it has to go somewhere. And once it goes in the atmosphere, sure, plants suck it down. The ocean sucks it down. But nothing escapes. Like, I think very few molecules are actually escaping, like, the gravity of Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
It's also
Like,
here.
we are this controlled system.
Well, yeah, I mean it's an ecosphere, and it's the like you can buy the little ecospheres where it's like a constantly moving ecosystem inside of a glass sphere. And Stephen is asking, since people have gotten more aware of these issues, has CO2 emissions gotten less?
So they have not.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So
So that's why we're here today, guys.
That's why we're here. So we have. So as we emit more and more CO2 in the atmosphere, the CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide, other gases, they vibrate at that frequency and trap more heat. So they've been able to measure the concentration going from, in the high 200 parts per million up into now like close to 400 parts per million.
Yeah.
So you add that much more, blanket to the Earth, and then the Earth traps more heat. And that's a very simple. It's invisible. Nobody's making that happen. Nobody's trying to do that. That's just light and the molecules in physics.
Yeah.
And so that starts happening, and then you start having more energy in our system, and then different things start happening with the climate, with water, with weather, with wind, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really is, yes, Stephen, it has gotten worse. It's gotten much, much worse. One of the things that I'm sure you get to deal with all the time is scientific studies that come into the office, people proposing plans for things like the city of Georgetown, which is zero emissions, like you said, on electricity. It's not like a zero emission city totally. But as far as electricity goes, like all of their electricity is produced via solar or via wind, one of the two. And even that technology, like we were saying, has some kind of impact. I was telling Julie all of a week or so ago about I do a corporate AV for a living, and I get to sit in on a lot of conferences. One of them that I got to sit in on was the National Utilities Commission. And it was right as the Tesla wall technology was coming out, and the CTO from Tesla came in and gave a presentation rather about their new wall technology and about how they'd done a study down in Hawaii, comparing it to the cost of fossil fuels and I was like, that's funny. You did a solar study near the equator on an isolated power grid. Like, it just seemed like a lot of loaded things to me where everyone was like, oh yeah, harumph. This is great. It's like, wait a minute. Like, there are no fossil fuels produced in Hawaii. They all have to be shipped in. So they're like more expensive to begin with. Like,
so all the more reason to use that sun.
Absolutely.
It's right there for you.
But it's like, how often are studies like that done, like in Poughkeepsie, or in Idaho, or even here. I remember one of the first meetings I worked in Austin. There was a guy from, and I want to say it was Pecan Street Energy here in town. And he was doing research on the impact of LED use on the power grid. What are some of the things that are facing the city of Austin right now? Because I know right as I moved here, we were having like rolling brownouts, that kind of stuff in the summer heat. It does. But, there are a lot of issues with our country's power grid right now, all that kind of stuff. So there's a reason why we haven't just like converted everything over, people. It's not that we don't want to.
Exactly.
It's that the power grid has to be adapted for this technology to begin with.
The technology has to come. People have to adopt it. The economics have to work. And then business and government have to cooperate.
They have to be. They have to be behind it together.
Kind of a losing battle in Texas to try to do that too. I mean, no offense, Texas, but it's not the best.
Texas does have a history of fossil fuels.
Right.
We do.
But I think there's definitely a new history being written with wind and solar.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Texas is by far the largest wind producer in the United States. And the thing is, I think, and this kind of comes back to that concept of business, is that, the color of money is green, and people don't care if it's politics or, if they like fossil fuels.
That's a
like,
really
people
good
don't-
recycling tagline.
The
color of money is green.
It
color
is
of
actually really good.
Like,
You should
that's a
make
PR
t-shirts.
campaign.
I would buy that
That's
shirt.
a PR campaign, man.
Yeah, and so, if you're a rancher and you live out in
Yeah.
West Texas, you've been out there. It's huge expanses and it's really windy.
Yeah.
If somebody offers to put up a wind turbine and it's going to make money, it's going to make electricity, you're going to get paid for it. I mean, who's going to say no to that?
Yeah.
I mean, and there's no emissions to the atmosphere. Sure, you have to look at the wind turbine, but
They're pretty, though. I love driving out there past all those wind farms.
I think it's really cool, too.
Yeah.
It's certainly better than looking at a power plant.
Yeah, or
a plume
looking
of
at like
smoke.
what used to be nice hills that are now just like flat and gross.
Yeah, and the question is, how do we begin to adopt that? Where do we start? Like I said, we have an aging power grid in this country that is horribly maintained, like our rail systems, about as well maintained as
And
our
our
rail
bridges.
system, which people don't realize how much of our product, especially petroleum, goes across the rail system in this country.
Yeah.
Like, without railroads, you wouldn't have gas, folks.
Yeah.
It's just that simple.
So in Austin, part of what my office does is that we do the work to understand where are the emissions coming from in Austin? What is the city of Austin? And not just city, like the city government, like the entire community, me, you, this room, the restaurant, everything. We do the math and do the analysis to understand how much energy are we using and then how much emissions are being created from that. And so you call it a greenhouse gas inventory. We do you do it on an annual basis. So you sum up like all the energy use over that time.
Oh, wow.
And the two primary sources of emissions, there are some smaller ones, but the two big ones that take up all the time and energy are electricity and natural gas use in buildings, and then transportation.
Sure.
So gasoline and diesel. And so our council has adopted this net zero greenhouse gas emissions target by 2050. We have all sorts of programs that are being implemented to try to reduce emissions. Then it basically comes down to the power utility in our buildings and transportation. So with electricity, the good thing for the city of Austin is that we own and control Austin Energy. Austin Energy is a department of the city of Austin. They are wholly owned and controlled by the city. The city council is the board of directors of Austin Energy.
Oh, wow.
So Austin Energy has to make decisions about how do they produce power and how do they sell power into the market and how do they basically deliver power for our community.
Yeah.
And so over the course of the last 10 years, they've started down this path through the community stepping up and telling Austin Energy that they want clean power, through the city council members who, essentially can vote and control the direction of Austin Energy.
Yeah.
So they started implementing plans to reduce fossil fuel usage in power plants and increase renewables back in 2007. Mm-hmm. Now we are to, I think, around 40% renewable energy. So all the power that's going through all the lines in Austin, or about 40% of that total throughout the whole year, is from renewable energy.
Nice.
And so that's from solar on people's houses. That's from large solar plants, like just east of town, there's the Weberville solar plant. Mm-hmm. Well, large solar plants like that. And then the bulk of it comes from wind power. So contracts with huge wind plants out in the west, as well as like down by the coast.
Yeah.
So we're around 40% right now. The target now that council just adopted last fall is to get to 65% renewable energy by 2027. Then when you stack on the portion of the South Texas Project nuclear plant that we own, that's 25% of our power. By 2027, we'll be at 90% carbon-free power for all the electricity that's delivered to people in the city.
That's impressive. Now, you mentioned that 25% of our power right now is coming from nuclear.
It is.
Where do you find that impact on things? Because it's really a lot safer than most people would consider.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the long term, the challenges with nuclear are numerous, and dealing with the long-term waste and dealing with, something that's going to be hazardous for thousands of years. I mean, there's no question that it has problems. But at the same time, that South Texas Project nuclear plant, which is down on the coast, sort of like if you just follow the Colorado River to the coast, we're a partner in that with numerous other organizations. And it creates massive amounts of electricity, and they're not burning fossil fuels at that plant. Yeah. I mean, they had to mine the uranium and do all of the science and technology and build the plant to make electricity from that nuclear plant. But day in and day out, they're not burning coal and they're not burning gas. And it's creating massive amounts of power. And the key question that you've sort of been hitting on with this grid question is that the difference between renewables and fossil and nuclear is that renewables, because they're based on our natural cycles, the wind doesn't blow 100% of the time.
Yeah.
The sun.
That's right.
The sun does go down every night.
It does.
What?
It does. And Steven's mentioning, that nuclear plants are always built on a coast. They are because you require a mass amount of water to cool a reactor.
Yeah. There's some that are inland.
Yeah, there are a few, but they're always near some major body of water, be it a lake, be it a large river. Something like that, where they have a means by which to pump things to cool. And of course, everyone has fears of Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl.
And they're real things.
They are. Those are 3 out of the 4 major incidents in the last 40 years of nuclear use.
And there's thousands of nuclear plants.
Yeah. Right, and then you look at pipelines and they're constantly leaking. So I would think
exactly. And I mean, the Navy has been nuclear for since the end of World War II. Yeah. Almost like most, they went away from steam, and there is still some diesel powered stuff out there, but most everything is nuclear powered now. The carriers, all that kind of stuff, because you're looking at a much longer lifespan. As far as usage.
It partly comes back to that, public perception and public, understanding of science and understanding of, having fear of things that people don't understand. Sure. Fear of unknown, fear of change. So nuclear ends up being, they turn that thing on, and when it's running, I mean, it's, whether it's windy or not, and whether it's sunny or not, it's
you're going to get the power.
Yeah. And there are a couple other sources like that have been considered. Geothermal is one. I wish that they would do a lot more research into that. Yeah. Because you can tap geysers, all that kind of stuff. There's that heat's constantly being created. Yeah. Just that and tidal. I'm really surprised that we don't do more research into tidal electricity.
Tidal and wave? And ocean. I mean, I think
as long as we have used dams in this country and across the world to produce power and that kind of stuff, I'm really surprised that we don't look more into tidal generators off the coasts, that kind of stuff, because that's something that is constantly happening. It's never not happening.
Require the sun to be out.
Yeah. And it's a constant source of power that we can use at any point.
Yep. Yeah, so what you mentioned earlier with Pecan Street and with the concept of batteries. So the batteries right now are battery technology developing and becoming better to store more energy, to have charge and discharge times, to be able to go faster, and for just the cost to drop, are super important for 2 different reasons. So the first reason is for renewables, because of the intermittency of renewables. That I have solar on my house that I got a rebate from Austin Energy and got a home equity loan and put solar on my garage. On a yesterday, really sunny days, it creates power all day, but I'm not there using the power. And it pushes the power out to the electric grid.
That's right.
And then when I get home, I turn on the TV, I make food, do whatever in my house, and I'm pulling power from the grid. So even though I have solar on my house, I'm not actually using exact electrons.
Yeah, you're just kind of
sharing them. With the whole thing.
Well, and I mean, it's a bleed over system. Once your batteries and everything at your house, if you have that, are charged, and everything else bleeds back into the system.
Yeah, so almost no one has a battery now in Austin. But if I had one, then you could get into a situation where the battery was charging all day when I was gone, and then when I come home,
you could actually run off of it.
Yeah, then I could run off the battery.
Exactly, and you find that a lot more out in country homes, things like that.
So they're starting to We're starting to get there.
Yeah,
and so it's not only small scale batteries that people could use on their houses, but huge, utility size batteries where you could take like a wind farm that's making tons of power and then charge up the battery and then use the power when the power is more expensive.
Exactly.
So that's an interesting thing. The other really important thing with batteries right now is in vehicles. So sort of moving the conversation over to the transportation side of things. With transportation, it's over 99% of all the transportation in our lives is run by fossil and diesel.
Yeah.
Run by gasoline and diesel. And really, trying to get people out of cars, trying to get people to walk and bike, trying to get people in public transportation.
That's tough in Austin.
Is important, but it's also really tough. And trying to make that change happen is going to be really hard. Like, we're not ever going to be Chicago or New York City or San Francisco where thousands of people are like using a train every day.
No.
And it's got to be a lot more efficient. Like, I used to work pretty close to my house. It's a 12-minute drive. But if I took the bus, it's 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Like, nobody's going to do that.
No, it's not going to work for people. And that's one of the most interesting things about this, doing work in sustainability or in climate. It's, it's about science, but it's about change. It's about understanding, like, how do you move from one system to a different system, and then having the technology work, having the people work, having the whole thing.
Well, yeah, because you've got to have people behind it. Like you said, you've got to have local businesses behind it. You have to have people interested in using that kind of energy to begin with. And it really is bringing that understanding to people and making them see the difference, bringing it inside their home. And like you said, being able to get a home equity loan and get solar put onto your house.
Yeah. Well, and to understand that, like, the electricity, whether it's coming from a solar panel or coming from a fossil power plant, it comes the same way. Like, we don't really care about where the electricity comes from. We just want, I think this is Amory Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute, has said people want cold beer and people want, like, air conditioning in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
they don't care where it comes from.
They don't care. People want to get to work in a timely manner.
Right.
They don't care, like, how they get there.
Yep.
They get there in a spaceship. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It
just want it to not take 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
I don't want to get up at 5 a.m. to save, I don't know, an eighth of a gallon of gas.
Yeah, so it's not that people don't want the difference. Like, people don't want to use fossil fuels. They just want solutions that work for
They
them.
just want it to be convenient.
Yeah. So the best, the thing that I think Austin is sort of putting its weight behind and is coming along fast is battery powered electric vehicles. And how fast can the battery prices drop so those cars are cheaper?
Yeah.
Because battery electric vehicles are they perform better. They're cheaper to maintain. They're simpler than gas-powered vehicles. Like, they are a better product than gasoline-powered cars. But right now, they're more expensive, and they don't have the range to take people super far distances.
And you gotta, once again, have the grid to be able to drop power lines so that in every parking lot, there are charging stations, all that and then you got to make people understand that a charging station is not where you park your vehicle for 3 hours.
This is true.
That's meant for like 20-30 minutes, and then you leave and somebody else parks there. It's not like, let me go watch a movie while I'm charging my car.
It's like
just leave it there all
the
day
cultural
while you're
change.
It is, and it really is a mentality shift. And it can take a while to break that pattern. We talk about it a lot on this show, the concept of small.
What's small, Steven?
I don't know. Steve, how many have you had this morning? I'm about on half.
Maybe the electric cars are small?
Could be. They are very small.
They can.
Well,
so that's the
Teslas
thing.
are nice, though. I mean, I know they're
Teslas are
making an SUV.
It depends on what your needs are.
Yeah. And what people want, right?
Yeah.
Like, people like trucks and big SUVs. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel safe. And I don't have anything. I mean, I understand that. And that, like, people are entitled to like whatever they want.
Yeah.
but we got to have a battery electric powered F-150.
Oh yeah,
looks big and tough and mean.
Yeah.
But doesn't use fossil fuels.
Well, and the question is, because I mean, Tesla did just come out and say, "Hey, look at our fleet of automatic diesel trucks."
Yeah,
that are like robotic
semi-truck.
Yeah,
that look like spaceships.
Cool. and are autopiloted, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Now, I guess my main concern is the fact, especially talking about business mentality and things like that. As awesome as Tesla is, where would they be without subsidy?
Yeah.
I love the idea of moving technology forward, but when does it get to the point where that business can be self-sustaining on its own?
Yeah.
Without federal subsidy, without subsidy from state or federal sources. How far off are we from that? That you can see.
I don't know, and that is one of the. That's when you get into the industry standing on their own and subsidies and tax credits and all that stuff, it's really murky, right? Because oil and gas companies get tax credits and subsidies too.
Oh yeah,
exactly. That's what I was thinking. Like in the auto industry, I mean, look at that, got totally bailed out 10 years ago.
And so
it's not like energy, like power, electricity.
Yeah.
They're not getting less from the solar than the oil. I bet the government spends way more money on oil than it does right now on
because it supports the economy and helps things work. So it is I think that's the thing that always gets people like to turn that into this political argument of like, well, my industry doesn't get help from the government. Yours does.
For sure it does.
No.
For sure
But everybody's is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just it. When
thanks, Steve-O.
When do we start to make that mentality shift? Because I know I was saying earlier before we started the show, even talking about within your own home, when do you start to make the mentality shift of trying to make as little impact as possible? My wife just the other day was saying, we're looking at possibly extending our lease on our place, and she was like, I would like to start composting just so I know how to compost whenever we get a house. Like, that sounds great. That's awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's why I have chickens.
Yeah.
Why get rid of scraps when I can feed them to chickens and then they give me eggs?
Our neighborhood actually has composting bins now that they pick up on the the same days as recycling. That's great.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And Austin is fantastic about those programs.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting, and this is just true in the city, and I think it's true like culturally that. So I didn't mention when I was talking about sources of emissions, I didn't mention waste, but waste of materials and all the stuff that we buy and throw away has a massive effect on the environment. It has an effect not only when you put stuff in a landfill, landfills create greenhouse gas emissions, but we have to truck and transport our waste all over the place. And buying things from different countries and different parts of the country, stuff has to be shipped here. So there's a huge impact with all the stuff that we buy and use. And I think like in the environmental movement sort of over the last 30 years, recycling and people either, recycling a can or understanding that if you put a banana peel in a compost bin and then turn that into soil and put it back in your garden, I think because it's physical and people can see it and people can connect with it, it's I think it's been called the gateway drug to environmentalism. It's because people, when you start to, it's very easy, I think, for most of us to be disconnected from the natural systems, to be disconnected from, the flow of biology and of how the world works, because we sort of are in these sheltered human lives. But when you understand how a compost bin or a worm bin works and are actually engaging in that process, then I think people start to sort of understand oh wait, invisible science is happening and I can be a part of this. This is a real thing.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up worm bins, because that was something that my grandfather had.
Oh, no way.
He had an entire flower bed on the side of his house that was just his worm bed.
That's awesome.
And that's where he went and put his coffee grounds. He went and turned everything into the soil. And anytime we went fishing, we just went and hit the worm bed and grabbed a couple cans cans of worms, and that's what we took fishing. Yeah. But he would take them and put them out in his garden. Yeah. You know, every once in a while he'd go out and he'd split the worms, and you cut a worm in half, it makes 2 worms. You know,
and it's essentially just a compost bin like on steroids.
Sure.
That you add the worms into the situation. And they're digesting the bacteria, which is making more bacteria and more fungus and
healthy soil. Yeah. And it's
then if you close that loop and actually like have, you know, even if it's the tiniest garden that, you know, even if it's just a few plants, like taking your own waste to make soil to make tomatoes and then eat the tomatoes. I mean, it just it's really cool. And that's like nature and science in action.
Yeah, and that's what I was bringing up earlier was especially in the college town that Austin is, whenever you're looking at the fact of what, a good 20-25% of our population is college students, people living in apartments, that kind of stuff, you know, migratory people who are here for like 3 or 4 years and then they leave.
Yeah.
Quite a few of them stay, but most of them leave, go off other places. But while you live in an apartment, even, you know, you can make a worm bed out of a 5-gallon bucket, you know, and keep that. I know whenever I lived in an apartment with my wife, I started making moves to make my kitchen as zero waste as possible by keeping all of my vegetable scraps, all that kind of stuff in a Ziploc bag in the freezer. Same thing with chicken bones. And I just made stock out of it, you know, and reused it and then got rid of that. But I had considered having a worm bucket to put all of those scraps into.
I feel like Amy would not be on board with you having a bucket of worms.
The one that I really considered was actually...
It doesn't smell at all.
No,
it
does not. It does not. But the one that I'd really considered was having a closet aquaponics setup.
Oh, there you go.
Where you actually have like a couple
tomatoes and cucumbers.
You have a small closet garden, and then feeding that is the water and waste coming from fish. That you either keep a couple of catfish or you keep a couple of tilapia. Something like that are very easy to keep.
That does that.
And then and cool. You end up getting fish out of it within a year. You know, like they're being fed, and it's like we said, a closed loop system. And there's a really great place. Have you ever heard the Quirky Country Market? It's out on 71 just before you hit I-10, and it's the really weird looking place with all the solar panels.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean it's right across from the bison farm. Yeah, exactly. And those guys are really great. They have some great programs there where they actually teach aquaponics. They teach solar. They teach wind farming, all that kind of stuff. And you can go and sign up. Are there any resources like that here in Austin? Any classes for people like Steven who are considering, you know, putting solar on their house?
Yeah, there are. So the city of Austin offers a myriad of rebates for things related to energy efficiency and solar, all the way to numerous things offered by resource recovery for composting and recycling. There are composting classes, there's rebates. So the city has no shortage of resources for people to either just connect online or to go to something in person. A good way to get connected with it is the Office of Sustainability has a Facebook page. And I think Resource Recovery and Austin Energy have Facebook pages too.
I know Resource Recovery does because we've had them on the show.
Yeah, and they manage those very well and like make sure that people are up to date, and you'll get sort of all that info on what to participate in. Back to what you were saying about the college student thing. You know, when thinking about the sources of emissions in the community, if you live in a small apartment that's well insulated in a large building, you're likely using very little electricity and natural gas to like heat and make your life work. So that's a good thing. If you live near campus and you're going to school, you're probably walking or biking most of the time. So you're not using fossil fuels in your vehicle. And then if you're recycling and or composting, whether it's through the city program or some other program, if you're doing all those things, you are doing
a big part,
huge part. And sort of like being the example of what we need everybody to do. And not to say that we want everyone to live in small apartments or, you know, and walk to work every day. But that is one example of, in 2017, a person can live a very low emissions lifestyle.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And, to contrast with other people in the Austin community that live in the completely opposite situation. But it's very doable if you're conscious about it and if you pay attention to it. And if you want to do it.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, you don't have to make large scoping, sweeping change in your life, folks. There are tiny steps that you can make. There are tiny things that you can do on the daily. Like I said, keep even if you don't have room for a scrap pile in your backyard, if you don't have chickens, which are a great way to get rid of waste, all that kind of stuff. Even keeping stuff in your freezer to make stock out of and reusing it. Reduce, reuse, recycle. That's what we've been taught. I know since I was, probably 10, that campaign started, with Woodsy the Owl and all that kind of stuff.
Like doors and windows, too, make a huge difference.
Yes.
I told you before, we're remodeling.
Yeah.
I just changed out our door that came with the house, the sliding door.
Oh, yeah.
It's made a huge difference. Like all the heat
double
stays
pane.
in, all the air conditioning stays in, the noise, like outside, we used to be able to talk to each other with the door closed, so that tells you how terrible it was. Like, it's totally soundproof now. So.
Yeah.
Like,
Once
sure
you get
that's
double
helping.
pane glass and all that kind of stuff, it makes a huge, huge difference.
Yep.
Well, and that gets to this point where, like, the movement around climate change and environmental stuff, I think for a long time was focused on trade-offs, was focused on, like, you need to buy this light bulb, but it's suckier than the light bulb you already have. Like, you need to ride the bus, but oh wait, it's going to take you longer.
Yeah.
I think we've all realized that people, those things aren't going to happen, and people aren't going to do those things.
Well, and like a big one for me that started was when CFL bulbs came out. It was like, wait a minute. You're going to ask me to save power, but put a toxic substance in my home.
I remember when one broke and we had to leave the house because like it was terrible how bad it smelled.
Yeah, like in all reality, you got to like cut out the patch of carpet and like get rid of that too.
Yeah, it was bad. We had to call the fire department, and they were like, "Oh, get out of your house and open the windows." And I was like, "Awesome, thank you."
And that was one of the things that Pecan Street Energy was doing. Was whenever I saw them give their presentation, was how badly we needed to update the grid, because this technology is coming out, and we've gotten to a point where, for almost 100 years, our power grid is focused on incandescent bulbs and on the use of that. And I don't know how science oriented you are with electricity, but there's the signal to noise ratio, and for every bit of signal that you put out, there's going to be an amount of noise coming back through the system. And the sine waves match up much more with signal to noise, more signal, less noise with incandescent than with fluorescent and with LED. And that's kind of the danger, was what he was saying, was if we made this huge switch to LED, the signal to noise ratio is so big that it could literally start causing issues with like transformers catching fire in older neighborhoods, that kind of stuff, if everything on a grid suddenly switched over to LED instead of it being slow and steady progress toward that, and updating the grid while we do these technologies, and that was kind of his caveat, was like, it's great that we have this, it's fantastic, but we need to start focusing on building the power grid toward these technologies to begin with. Because and a huge one that's happened here recently, Stephen and I just worked a big conference with it where they were talking about the impact on the local power grid with industrial marijuana growth in certain places, because the it's an insane power draw, and they're literally like building off grid systems in these places where this stuff is coming about.
I think the people are growing like in Denver.
Oh yeah. Denver, California, all that stuff. Even
Denver
even
seems
up
like
north.
wind would be a good option, but maybe not solar.
But they've had to seriously reconsider what's going on with power and that kind of stuff to make sure that this is available. Just talking about business and power. That's something that I know Texas has considered. I know Houston is decriminalized. They've considered going medical and even recreational because of the tax breaks. The mass amount of tax money that's been made by the states that have. But it really is a system that we all need to be aware of, that we all need to realize our impact daily on. Like, I got into the habit years ago of not leaving lights on. I'm superfluous lights. Where it's like, hey, you going back in there for like the next hour?
Terrible. I just bought a light fixture with like 12 bulbs on it too. Yeah. Like it's just cute.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie. I have.
If it's using LEDs, it may be using less than like one.
They're Edison lights. Yes, it's not good.
Oh, the ones with the bulb. Those are cool.
They're beautiful.
They probably use more energy.
I'm sure I have like 40 of them in my house right now. But I took out my lawn, so that's something.
Well, and that's another one. That's another one that a lot of people don't realize that they can do to help out is
Xeriscape.
Rainwater. Yeah. Collecting rainwater, that kind of, because it takes a lot of power to pump water, folks. It takes a lot of power, especially if you're on your own property, to pump water out of your reservoirs and wells.
I think Austin Water is the largest electricity customer of Austin Energy.
Oh, yeah.
Because to pump the water, to treat the water, to move the water, to treat the wastewater, all of that uses a massive amount of energy.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about, especially in Texas, like, one of the things that it brings up on the Austin City Plan, folks, if you go to austintexas.gov, you can actually go to the summary of the community plan. It's a 4-page PDF. And one of the things is increased risk of wildfires, current signs of climate change in Austin, extended periods of drought, intense rain and flooding.
Yeah. Check.
Yeah. And, the intense rain and flooding happen. I mean, we have intense rains, but the flooding happens.
Snowstorm.
We did. And that's how I started off if you don't think something's going on, folks.
Right? I've lived in Austin since 2003. Snowstorm? Are you kidding me?
Before parts of the Northeast got snow, mind you.
We won.
Before Boston.
Before Alaska. My friend from Facebook from Alaska was like, how do you have snow and we don't have snow? Like, I don't want to talk about it, Alaska.
Yeah. And
I've heard it termed global weirding.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so Austin.
Austin weird.
But my dad actively owns a rain gutter company, that kind of stuff, or still works for them, but owned it. And the city of Houston actually gives rebates for whenever you go to build a house, they'll tell you how much rainwater you should collect to offset your yard.
Oh wow.
And that kind of stuff. And they'll like help you purchase the rain barrels, all that kind of stuff, to offset that cost.
Yeah. That's not something we've talked about very much over the course of the last hour. But so another part of our work is the climate is changing. Yeah. And we're trying to understand. So we've worked with a professor from Texas Tech University named Catherine Hayhoe. You can look her up online. Okay. She's kind of like a rock star scientist lady.
I like rock star scientist ladies.
Yeah.
She's super, get her on the show.
Super technical and complicated, but she's also very friendly and very good at communicating and talking about the issue. So we've worked with her to understand climate projections for the Austin area, and it says just what was on that page. So increased risk of extreme heat, drought, flooding, and wildfire. Yeah. And looking out 50 years, 100 years in Austin, the scientists that run the models that use all of that complicated science of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and how climate patterns could change. Austin, how in 2011 we had, 90 days over 100 degrees? Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're projecting that by mid and end of the century, that's going to be every single summer.
Yeah.
And things like flooding. I mean, they're projecting that we will likely have about the same amount of annual rainfall, but we'll be in fewer storms,
Yeah.
and we'll just have more extreme flooding.
Yeah, and I mean,
seems to be the trend.
The extreme flooding and stuff happens because of lack of rainfall. When the ground actually gets a regular amount of water, like it's ready to soak it up, just like a sponge. But much like a dry sponge that you just get from the store, it just wants to go right off of it for the first little bit, and that's where flash floods happen. All that kind of stuff is from the extreme dry, from the extreme drought, and everything else. And then you're talking about roads washing out. Because they're too dry underneath, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, property being destroyed. I mean, it's all. I mean, it's bad.
Yeah.
But drought, into what you were saying about either capturing rainwater or getting rid of your grass and your irrigation system. I mean, things like that have so many benefits. Like if you get rid of your grass, you don't have to cut the grass anymore.
Right.
You don't have to spend the money on the water to keep the grass alive. You keep water in the lake.
And through the Austin Resource thing, you can get free mulch and soil and stuff depending on the availability. So we mulched our backyard.
Nice.
Yeah, it looks beautiful too, and the dogs love it. And the squirrels, oh my gosh, we have all these little holes now because the squirrels like bury stuff all the time. It's so cute.
There you go. Yeah.
And then the dogs love the squirrels, so
yeah,
it's fun. It's good for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and to the wildfire question, I mean, the fires that happened in Bastrop, the fires that have happened in the West. Fires are a scary thing.
Yeah.
And, we have a lot of trees in Austin.
Yep.
And especially in the outlying areas. So the fire people call it the wildland urban interface. Mm-hmm. So it's where you have like wild areas and then you have people living right next to each other. That's where the sort of danger zone is. And, when we have, super hot summers and long periods without rain, all of those trees essentially just become kindling.
Yeah.
And if that stuff catches on fire, I mean, bad things will happen.
Stephen was just asking, do the California wildfires affect weather and the change of normal climate pattern? And if so, how? Absolutely. Absolutely. Wildfires, things like that have a huge part to play in your local climate. Particles attaching to water in the air are how clouds are formed, folks. So,
and when you take all that, that's carbon that came from the atmosphere that got locked up in all those trees and plants. And when it catches on fire, it goes into the atmosphere.
Yeah, and not just that, but you're talking about the fact of not only is it building cloud cover, it's also blocking out sunlight, which is causing a cooling, all that kind of stuff. So, it totally contributes to the weather cycle.
Yeah,
and
then
that kind of stuff.
The dangerous thing, this happened in Bastrop, and it's probably going to happen in California too, is that after you have a dry period and you have a fire, then, in all likelihood, what happens in the winter in California? It rains in the winter.
Yeah.
Then you have rain on land that there's been a fire. The trees are what's holding the soil.
The soil.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
massive. In California, it's going to be worse with the mudslides.
Yeah, and then you have flooding happen on top of an area that there's been a fire. Yeah. That's a mess.
Yeah.
And it's there's more debris. There's more erosion.
Yeah.
There's mudslides.
I remember when the Bastrop fire happened was just before I moved here, and I was still coming back and forth to see Amy on the bus. And I called her, and I was like, hey, we're going to be delayed. There's like a huge fire going on. And we were like an hour and a half, something like that, delayed on the bus, like going around the fire in Bastrop. But like I saw it happen. I went through it.
Well, you can see it from my house. That's how we got Horatio, because their animal shelter burned down. So we got a dog.
Yeah, there you go. That was nice.
He's so cute. Sorry, Bastrop.
Yeah, it's even now driving through there. Good God, that was almost 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And driving through there now, like it's just starting to regrow. Mm-hmm. So it takes a while.
It recatches fire like every couple of years, though. It's like it starts to come back, and then there's another fire. It's like, oh, guys, get it together. Get rid of the underbrush.
Well, and the thing is, with dry climates, with the climate that we're in to begin with, God, that was one of the only Permian forests left out there. Yeah. And, it's been through Lord knows how many thousands of times before we ever moved there or ever called it the Lost Pines because, a group of Mexican soldiers got lost on their way to San Jacinto.
Is that why?
That is why.
That's why?
Yeah. That's why it's called
History
the Lost
and
Pines.
science,
That's
guys.
right. And yeah, because of them getting lost, Santa Ana was actually undermanned, and that's one of the reasons why we won the Battle of San Jacinto, was because that battalion got lost on the way to
Two
support.
non-native Texans here. I bet Liam would have known that too.
No idea.
If you actually go to the Lost Pines Resort, they have all these great documents hanging around that tell the story of Lost Pines and all that kind of stuff. It's great.
That's cool.
But these are, like we're saying, natural cycles that we are now actively contributing to. Whenever we pump water out of the lake, good God, I didn't have a fishing license. I still don't have one because, I think we need like another year or so of good rain before it's really safe to go out and start fishing for keeping and all that kind of stuff again. I was big time on that at one point in life. And then it just got to where we had so many years of drought where it was like, no, we can't we can't add water to the lakes, all that kind of stuff. And you're talking low oxygen levels, and like it really does. It starts to affect the whole ecosystem whenever that starts happening. And understanding our place in that cycle, understanding our impact of it, even living in our urban environment. I think. Our country brethren out in Bastrop, folks that do live out on property, that kind of stuff, have a much greater concept of what their actual impact is than most people that live in an urban environment.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important things that people can do is, read stuff about science, watch TV shows about science. Yeah, like participate in science, like. Look at the sky, look at the soil, think about where your food comes from. Yep. I mean, the more that all of us think about where your water comes from, I mean, the more that people are cognizant of the systems that we are participating in and aware of these things, I think the more, ready people are to change and ready people are to realize that we are having an impact and need to do things differently. Because, it's very easy to wake up in your house and look at your phone and get in your car and go to an office building. And like stay inside all day. And like not pay attention or
literally have the disconnect. The disconnect. Like I said, one of the things we talk about on this show a lot is cognitive dissonance. And the concept that even when people, like we were talking about a flat earther at heart.
He's not.
I would love for that to be the case for us to have been like utterly scientifically wrong for like the last 2,000 years.
Wouldn't that be funny? And like so implausible. Like
that was not Magellan that came back. He did fall off, and some other dude came back in his stead. He was just gone for so long that people forgot what he looked like.
But then there's science about that. There's science about how does the atmosphere work with these flat planets?
Right? You might actually have to try even harder to make that make sense.
It'd even be more complicated.
It's much more science. Much more science
like, how have we not
involved.
just fallen? Like, how is this happening?
How do we have a rotational gravitational sphere?
I don't understand.
Yeah. So I would love for that to be the case. I would love for us to have zero impact on the Earth and for climate change and climate science to be the myth of myths. But it's not. It's not. It's not, unfortunately. Yes, a volcanic eruption puts out probably about as much as I think, as the Great Depression, stuff like that of ecological impact. But
just because like nature does it occasionally doesn't mean we should do it
constantly. Yeah, like on the steady,
24/7.
Yeah. Just constantly doing it. And like I told my wife, one of the reasons I got the chickens was when my child is older, it's great for them to feed a dog, great for them to feed a cat or to have a goldfish, something like that to learn responsibility. But there's nothing like actively getting your food from that animal that's a lesson of life cycle. That's a lesson of, look, you're stewarding something so that it can take care of you too. And that's what we have to do with our planet. That's what we have to do with our land. That's what we have to teach our children moving forward from this point on, is the concept that we are stewards. Whenever I did teach religion for many years, the one thing that I always started my class off with, no matter what grade it was the book of Genesis, and the fact that really we were just gardeners, man. That's what we were supposed to do. That's it. That's all God said, was like, take care of this place.
Take care of it.
Take care of it. It'll take care of you. And the day that we stopped doing that, we got kicked out. He kicked us out of the garden and said, well, guess where you don't deserve to be anymore, because you don't know how to follow rules and take care of the garden.
I think we're on our way to
get on out.
So let's start taking care of it. And where can people go to learn what you do and how to take care of themselves and their planet?
Yeah, so if you go to austintexas.gov/sustainability, if you all of this stuff is, if you Google anything related to climate change, City of Austin, climate change, Austin Energy, Austin Resource Recovery, recycling or composting, all the resources they'll be at the top of Google and they'll be easy to find.
Absolutely.
And if you're on social media, the Facebook sites are well maintained and have tons of up-to-date information.
Yeah, and if you're looking for one place for all this, folks, feel free to go by the Dudes and Beer podcast. We have all of the links there for the City of Austin sustainability plan, their PDF, things that you can do, classes that you can take. We have all of that stuff from the City of Austin Office of Sustainability linked right there on the website for you. So this episode will actually be coming out officially tomorrow. We'll be doing a live rebroadcast this evening of it because it is such important information, and we don't want our regular listeners at 8 p.m. to miss out on it.
But thank you, early morning people, for listening
to the
in.
early morning
a lot
people.
of texts that people are actually awake in the morning, so that's very cool.
Yeah. And Zach, we can't thank you enough for coming on, for spending the time. We'd love to have you come on some more, talk about these things as things develop in the city, as plans develop, as new programs come about.
Yeah, for sure.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much wraps it for this episode of Dudes and Beer.
Have a good day.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please make sure to check us out online. You can find us at the Dudes and Beer podcast, dudesandbeer.com. You can also find us on breach.tv. You can find us, on just about any
iTunes,
podcast outlet. We have our own app on Android and on iTunes Market that'll let you chat with us. Just search for the Dudes and Beer podcast. Also, please make sure to check out our sister podcasts on the HC Universal Network. Until next time, everybody, remember, if you can't be good, be good at it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer podcast. To listen to our audio streams and chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app for both Android and iDevices, available on the Google Play and iTunes markets. For more episodes, content, and information, visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find our episodes on Spreaker, SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next time, drink responsibly.